I'm sure everyone has heard of test. Like when a girl gives you some sort of little insulting comments or disagrees with you and challenges your opinions, or in some other way, she pushes back on you to basically test your confidence and your frame as a man. I've already made a couple videos about this before, but what I want to talk about in this video is the opposite of this, which is something that I call anti test, where she will actually give you compliments or show interest in you or give you some other sort of validation, and your reaction to these tests can make or break any attraction that she might have towards you. Just to give an example of how this works, I was recently in Serbia, and the way that I usually meet girls is by approaching, but sometimes, and I'm sure it's probably the same for everyone, like if I go a long period of time without approaching any girls, it takes a little while for me to get back into the swing of things. Like maybe 1 or 2 weeks before I start to do good and things start to really happen. It's kind of like if you don't work out for a long time, then you're going to be out of shape and get really sore the first time that you work out again. And it takes a couple of weeks to really get back in the swing of things. So it's the same basic thing that happens with the emotional system and facing social pressure, and especially with approaching girls where there can be a lot of fear and anxiety involved. By the way, this is one of the secrets of success for approaching girls, which is this process of acclimatization. So when I was in Serbia, I was going through this process of re-acclimatizing to approaching girls. And the way that I do that in the very beginning is just by approaching a bunch of different girls and giving them a compliment and then saying goodbye. I call this a hit and run approach, which is just to face the fear and get the momentum and energy going. So I was in the middle of doing this, but then one girl that I approached seemed to be instantly very attracted to me. So she immediately asked me if I wanted to go have coffee with her. This kind of threw me off because I wasn't expecting that. And I was even thinking like, man, I'm kind of still too nervous. Like, I don't know if I'll be able to really handle this right now. And I hadn't even scouted out the city yet, so I didn't really know where to go or anything. But I made a split-second decision to just say yes. But then I asked her, okay, where do you want to go? Which was basically falling into her frame by going along with her suggestion immediately and then relying on her to lead me to the place. But more importantly, it was the way that I was behaving on a subtle level. Like it was clear that I was feeding off of her validation by the way that I reacted to her suggestion. And I could feel this happening, but in my nervous sort of state, I wasn't able to control it. And I'm sure that she could also feel this, so she changed what she said, and she said that she can't go right now because she was on her way back to work. And I was kind of confused, so I said like, okay, when do you want to go then? Again, falling into her frame and following her lead and relying on her to make the decisions. But she said that she wasn't sure, so I asked her for her phone number, but she just said that she walked on this street all the time, so maybe we'll run into each other again. So she wouldn't even give me her phone number. So basically what happened was that I went into her frame and followed her lead and fed off of her validation, and as soon as she could feel that this was the case, she immediately walked back on her idea to go for coffee and then just left. So even though I had an initial good reaction from her, which is really all that I was going for in the first place, but things quickly turned around and she lost all interest in me because I failed her anti-shit test. And before we get into how I could have easily passed this test and how to pass this kind of test in general, first I think it's important to understand what exactly an anti-shit test is. So first of all, in order for a girl to be attracted to you, she needs to feel that she is in your frame as a man. Like she needs to be more concerned about you and your opinions and what you think about her than you are about what she thinks about you. And when you interact with her, she needs to feel that she's being drawn into your world and basically start seeing things from your overall perspective. So for example, if you are nervous talking to a girl, or if you feel like she's judging you, or if you have a hard time holding eye contact with her, or if you feel that you need to impress her or live up to her standards, all of these are examples of you reacting to or trying to fit into her frame. And this happens basically because on an unconscious instinctive level, you are afraid of her negative judgment and the possible social consequences that might come as a result of interacting with her. Because when you face a girl, you're not just facing her, but what you unconsciously perceive to be be her entire social world and her place within society as a whole. And this includes other potential men who might also be interested in her, who you are indirectly in competition with. So if you are reacting to her in a nervous or self-conscious way, it communicates to her that on an instinctive level, you feel inferior to her overall social world because you're basically flinching and reacting to it in a submissive way. So this communicates that you basically have lower status than she does. But when you are confident in the face of this kind of pressure, it communicates the opposite, that you have higher status in relation to her because you are unaffected by her judgment or the pressure of her overall social world. So when a girl gives you a traditional type of shit test or challenging your opinions or something like that, she's basically taking away her validation and putting opposing judgment and pressure on you to test your confidence and test your frame. But the opposite is also true, where if she gives you a compliment or shows interest in you or gives you some other sort of validation, if that animates you or changes your behavior in a very obvious way, where you are clearly boosted by the validation, then it communicates exactly the same thing as if you get shut down by her shit test. In other words, it shows that you are inferior to her social world. Otherwise, her validation would not have that kind of effect on you. Like if you are superior to her and she gives you some sort of validation, then maybe it's a nice thing. It's not like it's bad, but it's not going to affect you or your behavior all that much. So if it does affect you, it shows that you are basically inferior and feeding off of the validation. Just to show a very exaggerated example of this kind of thing so that it's very clear what I'm talking about, here's a clip from a guy doing a Tinder experiment with a fake account of a girl talking to a guy. I'll just show the clip first and then explain a little bit after.
Are you into pegging? What is pegging? It is where I wear a dildo and go to town on your ass. I never tried that. Is that something you're into? I don't think I'd like anything around my ass, honestly. I really want to try. Okay, but I get to do stuff to you. No!
So this is an exaggerated version of an anti-shit test, where the fake girl gives him a validation, but it's like a test just to see if he'll actually go along with it, which in this case he did, which makes him look very weak and pathetic. Like imagine if it was actually a girl who sent this message to a guy she was interested in, or maybe something not so extreme, but something similar to this, maybe in a joking kind of way, and then he responded like this. Then she would have to think like, okay, what's wrong with this guy? Like he has no boundaries whatsoever and he'll just do anything. So she would completely lose all respect and attraction for him. And even though this is an exaggerated example, it's the same basic thing that happens in a regular interaction with a girl. This can happen at any point when she gives you some sort of validation or shows interest in you. If you start to react to that in a way where it's like you are feeding off of her validation and you'll just give in and do anything or agree with anything that she says, then she will lose the attraction and immediately pull away from you. So how to actually pass this kind of test? The essence of it is just like with a shit test, where you need to remain emotionally unaffected by the test. So with a shit test, she's removing validation and putting opposing judgment and pressure on you. So you need to not get shut down or start getting defensive or becoming self-conscious in order to pass the test. You basically just need to be unaffected by it and respond to the test by reasserting your own frame. And with an anti-shit test where she gives you validation, you likewise need to remain emotionally unaffected by it, so that it's basically just not a big deal and you're not giving yourself over to her just because she gave you some sort of approval or showed some sort of interest in you. So with my example that I just gave in Serbia, how could I have passed that test? There's not one single answer. Like I could have passed it in various different ways, but just to give an example, instead of immediately agreeing to have coffee with her, I could have said maybe and then asked her what she was up to and figured out the overall logistics of the situation and then chat with her and get to know her a little bit and then ask her to go have coffee a few minutes later and then bring her to some coffee shop that I'm familiar with. So basically take her suggestion and then take control over the situation and take the lead. So I'm still agreeing into her suggestion, but I've turned the dynamics of the situation around so that it's now basically on my terms. And again, it doesn't have to be exactly like this. This is just an example. The point is to not fall into her frame and rely on her taking the lead and feeding off of her validation. So with a more simple example, like if she compliments you, just take the compliment. Like, it's not a bad thing that she compliments you, but don't be overly excited. Like, don't read into it too much or take it for granted that now she likes you or something like that. Just take the compliment in the moment and then move on as if it doesn't matter at all, because it really doesn't matter at all. And it's the same for any kind of attention or validation that you get from her. Just treat it as though it's not a big deal. Like, it doesn't really matter one way or the other. That's basically how to pass these tests. Just treat it as if it's something that's not very important and then move on with the interaction. This is also very much connected to if she starts to take the lead. As a man, you need to be the one to sort of take control of the overall situation and lead things. And this goes for every step of the way so that you can meet her and go on dates and lead everything all the way until sex. If you rely on her to lead, then either you're going to get rejected, similar to what we've been talking about so far in this video, or it's just going to lead to nowhere. So if you lack the ability to lead, then things are not going to go very well for you with girls in general. And you'll also lack the ability to pass these kinds of anti-shit tests that we've been talking about. If you want more info specifically on leading and why it's so important and how to take the lead and move things forward, I just made another video where I go into this in a lot more detail. So you can click on the video that should be on the screen right now, and I'll talk to you there.